This is the glaze table. The glazes are all underneath. They're all in alphabetical order. And you can see all of the glazes here. These are in non-alphabetical order. But if you look right here, it says first dip and second dip. So if you dipped in black, and then on top of that you dipped Magelica white, this is what you would get. So if my first dip then is chili. So if my first dip is chili, and then I'm thinking I want that color right there, what I'm going to need to do then is put CFG tan. So if we look at that one and compare it to the opposite, which is CFG tan on waterfall, it's that one up there. So this is waterfall under, this is CFG under. This is waterfall on top, this is CFG on top. So these are kind of flipped. So if you look at the chart, that's kind of how it works, is it's kind of like going this way. So the bottom row is always the first dip, and the side row is always the second dip. Right here we have slips for hand building. These are all advanced glazes. They might need to be fixed, added water to. Don't use them unless you know how to use them, unless you're in ceramics too and you talk to me specifically. Here are the brushes for oxides, engobes, and glazes. These are generally used for glaze mixing, which you won't need. Sandpaper. Oxides, which basically work like paint. They should all be correctly put together for drawing. It's like watercolor. If you want to just try it out, you can. I'm not going to do a demo on it. And these are the engobes. I might need to do a demo on that soon. Yeah, engobes are right there. So when you're sponging off a piece, what you're going to do is take a sponge, make it damp, not wet, only damp, and then you're just going to wipe the whole thing down. Because in the process of making after the firing, there's a powder that's still on the outside surface from when you made it. If you want to do a cool pattern with the glaze, what you can do is cut some pieces of tape, and you can basically just stick them onto your piece. You can use obviously scissors or any sort of cutting instrument. I don't have one right now. And you can just stick this onto your piece. And what's going to happen is wherever the tape is, you're not going to have glaze. You'll have raw clay. And wherever there is no tape, you're going to get the glaze that you want. So it's kind of a fancy, fun way to decorate your pieces with glaze. You can also do a first dip with this on here, then remove these, and then do a second dip of another color, and you will have the second dip color here only, and then here you'll have a mix of both. So I'll show you how to do that. You can just put the paddle on top of the glaze that you're stirring until you're able to actually clean it. And then you need to dip right away. You can't wait. So this is the drill, and on the drill is this part of the drill, which is called the chuck. And so if you see these teeth here, they go tighter when you screw clockwise, and they loosen when you screw counterclockwise. So you're going to put the stirring mechanism in, and then you're going to hold the top of this and try and twist. And I have no grip today, but even if I did, it would be very difficult to do this by hand. So that's how you're going to tighten. You're going to try and twist clockwise while your left hand twists counterclockwise on the chuck. And that's going to tighten it at least enough for you to be able to mix. And if you have really weak hands, ask someone to help you. Try the test style, 2, 3, 4, 5. Shake it off. If you come to a glaze and no matter how long you mix it and you do your glaze test, it still comes out thin, what you're going to do is do a second dip and then see how that turns out. Let that dry, and then if you need to, do another dip over that. I think Model Jade was made a little thin this time. That actually looks pretty good. You can kind of see the scrape right there. That's on the thin side, but it'll be fine. If you make these glazes too thick, like say 2 eggshells or 3, the glazes might even just slump off the clay body. So I've already mixed this glaze up. I'm going to show you 2 ways to dip your piece into the glaze. The first way is you can just hold it on the bottom or someplace where you know that you're going to remove the glaze later and just dip it all the way in and out. When you do that, make sure that you hold it to the side so that the glaze goes in here. Another thing you can do is take a cup that's similar in volume to what you're using and dip this in glaze, fill it, slosh it around a little until it's all the way on the rim, and then dump it out. Shake it. You'll clean up the rim with a sponge, and then what you can do is dip this whole thing into another glaze this way so that there's an air suction when you're dipping it in. These are glaze tongs, and you can just pick them out of the holder. They might all be stuck together, but make sure you put them all back when you're done. So what I'm going to do is take my piece, put it like this into the tongs, and then I'm going to dip my piece all the way in and do it for 5 seconds. 3, 4, 5, and then dump out and shake. So now we have the glaze all the way around. It's all eggshell thick, which is perfect. And we're pretty much done. So what we need to do then is get this bottom clean. And you can take this off of the tongs at this point. It's just that it's still wet. So as soon as this gets powdery, then you can touch it. If it's too wet, then you'll leave fingerprints, and you don't want to do that. The other thing is with tongs, you can see they leave holes. So what I can do with the holes is I can take some of the glaze and I can just kind of drop it into those holes on the inside and the outside. And as long as you do your glaze tests with the glaze test tile to get the proper thickness, to get the eggshell, and then you dip it for only 5 seconds, you should be okay. If you're like trying to make one of these glazes dip for 5 seconds and you go too thin, don't worry about it. Don't add any more water. If it's too thick, you can add water to it, but always use very small amounts of water. Like if I want to thin this glaze, which I don't, I would just like add maybe this much to a full bucket to start to thin it. And that's only if after you've stirred the thing for like 3 to 5 minutes with the drill attachment that it's still too thick, then you'll want to add some water to it. At the end, I like to dip my rim in a different color. So seems a bit thin, but that's good. Go with the time on the clock. It's better that the glazes are a tiny bit thinner because then you can actually do a double dip easier. So that's the double dip right there. So that's going to have a nice chili color, clear, and then some other stuff's going on down there. Hopefully will look pretty cool, we'll see. The final step for our decorating process is that we are going to take off all the pieces of tape before we put it in the kiln to fire. So make sure you do that. This hole right here will happen if your piece is too wet and you're touching it. You can see I adjusted it again, so trying to do this quickly isn't a good idea. Take your time, let things dry. You might need to let it dry an hour before you're able to remove your pieces of tape. It depends on how moist the atmosphere is. When you're glazing, you want to make sure that there is no glaze at all on the bottom of the piece that is going to be sitting on the kiln shelf in the kiln. So this whole foot area, which is this rim right here, really needs to be glazeless. See, like this. No glaze on this spot because it is where it's sitting. If your piece is flat on the bottom like this, then you'll need to completely wax the whole bottom or just remove all the glaze with a sponge. So now that I'm done, I've cleaned the bottom where it's going to stick onto the shelf if I didn't, and I have all the pieces of tape off. I'm taking it over to the glaze shelf and I basically just put it down on the shelf. Make sure that at the bottom of your piece here, you leave at least a 1/16 to an 1/8 inch of space so that when the glaze drips down, which it will not affect the kiln shelf. So you can see here there's like a 1/16, but I am very good at this. I know how thick the glaze is. Generally for you, I would do an 1/8 or more space here. Don't leave your glaze brushes in water. This one has been and it's bent actually, but this is what happens when you tend to leave these glaze brushes in water as they crack. And I've turned them into wax brushes. This is what the blue label means, is that this is for wax only. When you're done, make sure you clean your work area and the floor of the spots from your glazing, because there's always going to be spots on the ground. Just get the main pieces of glaze that kind of splashed out. And if you had any glaze on the bucket as well, just kind of wipe it down to keep the area really clean. Sometimes this happens when you take it out because some of these are a little bit on the heavy side and they tend to splash. So be very clean because this stuff has a lot of silica in it. And as you know, silica dust is really bad for you. When you're done with the tools, just be sure to clean them off. Make sure all the glaze is off of them. Put them away. And then the test tiles as well. You might have used like 10 test tiles, but make sure that you clean them off. And then these do not put back in the bucket that you found them in. Put them right next to it so that the next person knows that it was used. And then as soon as that tile is dry, it can go back in the bucket, but not until it's dry. So if you see a bunch of these and they're dry sitting here on the table, you can put these. But just make sure all your test tiles are scrubbed until you can't see the glaze that you tested on them anymore. And the test tiles, again, are to test glaze thickness. There is no other reason for them. And only use the ones that feel like they're stone, not the ones that have glaze on them already. So it looks like this. This person didn't clean this one very well, so just make sure you get as much of the glaze off as you can. There are toothbrushes by the sink too that you can scrub these off with. And I already did the wrong thing. I put the tile back that I wasn't supposed to put back. So I'm going to leave those there to dry. And those are all the dried ones.